let's talk about Antiquities and the Great War that leveled a continent and destroyed numerous cultures because two brothers were arguing over a shiny toy. The beginning seems like a good place to start, so let's start there. Our tale begins in the Great Desert, which, as the name implies, is a large desert that was controlled by various tribes that collectively were called the Falaji. Each of these tribes had cultural differences, but by their nature of living in the desert, they had more in common with each other than with most other cultures. Within this desert, an Argivian archaeological dig site controlled by Tokesha was set up to dig up Thrawn artifacts. Tokesha's dig site was well established by the time the brothers Urza and Mishra arrived. Argivian nobles would often send their problem children to Tokesha as a sort of summer camp to keep their kids out of their hair while she taught them archaeology. Urza and Mishra's father was ill, and their mother-in-law wanted nothing to do with them, so they were shipped out to learn about the Thrawn and artifacts of an age some 5,000 years old. Urza and Mishra were born the same year, which would later be known as the year 0AR, or Argivian Reckoning. But Urza was born on the first day of the year, and Mishra was born on the last day of the year. A quick fun fact about the Dominaria dating system is that their years are 420 days long, so Urza and Mishra are 419 days apart, which is more than a year in our world, but that's neither here nor there. Urza and Mishra were close during their youth, and understood each other well. Both boys were exceptionally brilliant, but each had their own interests. Urza was far more studious, and took great pleasure in scholarly pursuits, spending most of his time alone, whereas Mishra was often found helping and hanging out with the Falaji diggers and laborers that assisted the camp. During their years in the desert, Urza learned much of the inner workings of machines, and mathematics, and theory, whereas Mishra learned the languages and culture of the Falaji people, learning their legends and ways of thinking. Both boys were captivated by artifacts, and all the time they spent together was building or repairing the artifacts the archaeological site excavated. The brothers' skills complemented each other well, and what one could not see, the other usually could. Together, they rebuilt the first ornithopter, and while Urza took the first flight in 5,000 years, Mishra was more daring and perceptive, and during his flight, he discovered geoglyphs in the desert that eventually led the boys to the cave of Koilos. While Mishra discovered these glyphs, it was ultimately Urza that figured out these glyphs were showing the location. The boys and their beloved teacher Tokesha took the ornithopter to the cave of Koilos, where they discovered an exceptionally powerful and rare power stone. Mishra, always the more rash of the two, reached out to touch the glyphs under the power stone, while Urza reacted harshly and quickly to stop him, fearing it was dangerous. Nobody really knows which brother was at fault for what happened next, as both blamed the other, but the resulting explosion cracked the power stone in half, with each brother finding half the stone in his hand. These two halves of the power stone would lead to a bloody conflict and symbolize the wedge that was forever driven between these two brothers. The weak stone and the might stone are what Urza called them, for Mishra's stone would weaken and cripple those who faced its power, whereas Urza's stone would strengthen them. Mishra never called the stones by these names, simply referring to them as his stone and Urza's stone. The stones were intoxicating in their power, and both brothers refused to trust anyone with their stones. They grew short with each other, thinking the other only wanted to steal their half, and their paranoia grew so deeply that they both lost trust in their teacher Tokesha, who simply wanted to be impartial and help them understand the stones better. The brothers grew distant, with Mishra moving out of their shared domicile to reside with the Falaji laborers, where he befriended Hajar, one of the Falaji. One night, Mishra became emboldened by alcohol and encouraged by Hajar, where he decided to drunkenly attempt to steal Urza's stone, or perhaps just confront him about their grievances. But this turned into a violent shouting match that woke up the whole camp, and led to the brothers projecting their power at each other. Distressed by the scene, Tokeshia decided enough was enough and stepped between the brothers to get them to stop. The distraction caused the brothers to lose control of the power, which caused an explosion that killed Tokeshia. Still drunk, and now faced with the loss of his beloved teacher, Mishra ran out into the desert and disappeared. Both brothers would blame the other and themselves for the death of Tokeshia, and this may have been the nail in the coffin of their relationship. The Falaji people respected Tokeshia, for anyone who spoke with her knew she understood their language and customs and had nothing but respect for the lands and people. But the Falaji did not like or trust Argivians, and had been growing increasingly frustrated by all the treasures of the Great Desert being dug up and shipped back to Argiv. As it were, the tribe Suardi had been increasing its power and influence over the other desert tribes, and were particularly violent and hostile to foreigners, as their homelands, the Suardi Marches, or the Sword Marches, as it was known by the more civilized cultures, had been taken by the Yotians. The point is, tensions were high, and without Tokeshia, the archaeological dig site fell apart, and for his own safety, Urza had to abandon his home once again. Urza headed to Krug, the capital of Yotia, and attempted to get a job as a scholar at any of the many temples. Unfortunately for Urza, he had no formal scholarly training, and on top of that was an Argivian, who were known for being atheistic, while the Yotians celebrated and worshipped many gods. Urza instead found work as an apprentice to Rusko, the clockmaker. Urza proved useful at repairing clocks and worked tirelessly for little more than room and board. After some time together, Rusko grew annoyed at Urza's unwillingness to let loose. During this time, Yotia was celebrating a long stretch of peace that was starting to annoy the warlord of Krug. I don't know what the warlord of Krug's name is, because they never tell us, but the warlord of Krug was growing frustrated by the soft men he found himself surrounded by. He felt all of these weaklings that had never seen true adversity would ill fit the hand of his loving daughter, Kayla bin Krug. So, the warlord of Krug had a large jade statue made, and promised any man who could move the statue across the room the hand of his daughter. Rusko dragged Urza to this event to get him to loosen up and enjoy himself. Urza found this event as boorish and unappealing as Kayla bin Krug did. But, on the table holding the dowry, Urza noticed a book with Thrawn glyphs and decided that he needed this book. So he offered Rusko a trade. He drew up detailed plans for the construction of ornithopters and offered them to Rusko in exchange for the materials he needed to build an automaton that could move the statue. Rusko agreed and funded Urza's ambitions. The Jade Statue Challenge was hosted once a month, and on the third month, Urza and Rusko showed up with their automaton, cloaked to avoid reactions. After everyone that was there to attempt the challenge legitimately had their turn, Rusko talked to the warlord's people, who talked to the warlord, who was asked if Urza could attempt to move the statue with his mind. The warlord of Krug was amused and agreed. So Urza's robot was revealed and everyone was like, "Wow, zonks, what is that?" Then the robot moved the statue and the warlord got mad about it. Kayla had met Urza earlier when he had fixed her music box, and during that interaction, Urza hadn't made a big deal out of her being the princess or her being unbelievably hot. So she was interested enough to marry Urza. So they married, and Urza got his book, and Rusko became wealthy and powerful and a member of the court by getting his foot in the door. From this point, Urza became the chief artificer of the Yotian kingdom, and spent most of his time ignoring his wife, yelling at students and apprentices, and building tools of war for the warlord of Krug, who very much enjoyed having robots and flying machines. But, like, who wouldn't? But what happened to Mishra? Well, while Urza was marrying the hottest girl in the land and playing with his Legos, Mishra got captured by the Suardi and was a slave, spending his time getting beaten and digging ditches. Mishra was also having nightmares where he dreamed of Phyrexia. We don't know it's Phyrexia at this point, but it is. When they broke the Power Stone, the brothers unwittingly opened a portal to Phyrexia, but nobody is really aware of this yet. Anyway, Mishra was a slave, and this continued to not be a great situation until Hajar, the Falaja digger Mishra had befriended, happened by and saw Mishra working as a slave. Hajar had joined with the Suwardi as a warrior, and had built up some goodwill. He cashed it all in by heading to the Qadir and explaining that Mishra was the smartest man he knew, and that he could be far more useful than just digging ditches. The Qadir met with Mishra and gave him the chance to tutor his son. While the task was initially fruitless, with Hajar's help, Mishra eventually figured out how to incite the joy of learning into the boy. The son of the Qadir began to respect Mishra and enjoy his presence. The Qadir was an impatient and uneducated man, who decided Mishra was a crutch the boy needed to be rid of soon. Fortunately for Mishra, at the exact moment this was being decided, a dragon engine from Phyrexia burst through the portal and was called to Mishra and his weak stone. Oh yeah, while he was a slave, the Qadir obviously confiscated Mishra's power stone, but he wasn't really aware of what it was. Anyway, the Phyrexian dragon engine, called the Mach Fauna, attacked the camp and killed the Qadir. Hajar was able to acquire the stone for Mishra, who used it to calm the Mach Fauna. It was discovered that Mishra was able to control the mechanical beast. With his new power, and the new Quadrir being a boy that was friends with him, Mishra's life took a drastic increase in quality and influence. So, back to Urza. It's during this time that he got himself a new apprentice, by the name of Tawnos. He also spent most of his time ignoring his wife, yelling at students and being impressed with Tawnos, and building tools of war for the Warlord of Krug. The Warlord of Krug and Rusko, the clockmaker, turned council member, were also going behind Urza's back by developing bombs out of goblin gunpowder designed to be dropped from the Ornithopters. It was around this time that Mishra met Ashnod, though how they met was a bit different. The Mach Fauna proved to be a devastating tool of war, and the Qadir used Mishra and the machine to capture and control large portions of the desert, unifying the tribes under his rule. The Falaja Empire took control of Tomakul without so much as a fight, and afterwards, the Qadir decided to head south to Zegon, to take them into the fold as well. Issues arose when they got to the city though, as the dragon engine wouldn't get within a half-mile of the city. It was an interesting dilemma that solved itself pretty quickly. When Mishra got to his tent for the night, Ashnod was waiting for him. She was a red-haired beauty that was sent by the Council of Zegon to negotiate a surrender. Apparently, Ashnod had designed staves that were capable of holding the dragon at bay, but their use wore out the wielder to the point that it wasn't a permanent solution. The city agreed to join the fold, and Mishra took Ashnod as an apprentice. Then they banged. After the Falaji started gaining strength, they turned their attention to the Suwardi Marches, or the Sword Marches, an area of land between the Great Desert and Krug that the Warlord of Krug had taken from the Suwardi during his younger years. As raids into the Sword Marches became more prevalent, the Warlord grew increasingly frustrated and decided to unite the Argivians and the Corlisians, the other two coastal kingdoms, in a united front for peace talks with the Falaji Empire. These peace talks were a ruse, a method of drawing out the Falaji leaders. Urza was not informed that this was a ploy, and took it at face value that peace talks would be held. The peace talks were held in Korlinda, an outpost town of the Korlis nation that was located up the Kor River, which ran straight through Korlis. The town sat at the edge of the Kur Ridges, about where this map shows Urza's tower, though that hasn't been built yet. Urza himself was dragged into the peace talks because two of the Yoshan ornithopters were being given to Korlis for hosting the event. Urza felt it necessary to go along to instruct the Korlisians on how to properly work and maintain the machines. The metal humanoid Urza had built to move the statue was also brought with. as a show of force. The Falaji also brought a show of force, bringing with them Mishra, Ashnod, and the impressive dragon engine. Urza was of course shocked to see his brother with the Falaji, but was nonetheless happy to see him. The previous wounds had not healed on either side, but they were both willing to put the past behind them. Urza was excited to show his brother the recent modifications to the ornithopters in his school, but the matter of peace had to be discussed first. The peace talks did not go well. The Qadir was an impatient man and was quickly upset by the warlord of Krug's insulting and mocking tone. Their tempers rose, and the warlord unleashed his plan, as Urza's ornithopters took to the skies to the surprise of the Falaji and Urza himself. As the flying machines dropped bombs on the Falaji troops and dragon engine, Urza realized what Rusko had been working on when he had convinced Urza to let him handle the selecting of pilots. The Qadir, despite being overweight, moved with a grace yet unseen, and struck the warlord of Krug in the chest with his scimitar, and the warlord was killed. The robot Urza built was there too, and Urza had it attempt to kill or at least restrain the Qadir. Mishra and Urza both used their stones on the creation, and it exploded. But the Qadir survived this, and the Falaji routed. Mishra thought Urza was part of this plan, and refused to trust Urza from then on. So the two brothers found themselves on opposite sides of the conflict, and neither was willing to back down. In the aftermath, Urza turned bitter that his machines were used in a planned attack during a peace conference, an attack that would have been a massacre if not for Mishra's machine. Urza and Caleb bin Krug cleaned house, removing everyone from power that had anything to do with the attack, which was mainly Rusko and the captain of the guard. They also took the death of the warlord hard, as is expected. While the Yotians expected Urza to raise an army, he took the situation hard, causing a rift between him and his wife. He also felt war was a waste of resources and didn't want anything to do with the conflict. Caleb bin Krug got mad at Urza and would have banged Tawnos, but Tawnos fixed their marriage instead. In the aftermath of the attack at Korlinda, Mishra and Ashnod took the mock fauna to the cave of Koilos to see if they could find more useful tools of war for the Qadir. They discovered that Mishra and Urza opened a portal to Phyrexia, and entered Phyrexia itself. While there, they found more dragon engines, and Gix learned of Mishra's presence. Before he could catch them, Mishra and Ashnod escaped through the portal and removed the Power Stone, locking the portal shut behind them. Then, somehow, for some reason I don't really understand, the dragon engines that Mishra had tamed in Phyrexia were able to pass from Phyrexia into Dominaria and raised up from the sands. So, Mishra now had 4 dragon engines under his control. About a year after the tragedy that was the last peace conference, the Falaji sent word to the Yotians to offer peace talks again. The Yotians agreed to this for some fucking reason, and a month later the peace talks were held in Krug. The Qadir did not show up this time, and instead deferred the responsibility and power of negotiation to Mishra. Also, Ashnod was there. Also, Mishra and Ashnod had stopped banging by this point. So, the peace talk started. Ashnod and Tawnos met for the first time, and also, Tawnos got to see the dragon engine for the first time. Then, Mishra met Caleb bin Krug, Urza's wife, and was impressed by how hot she was. To quote the Brothers' War, but the part that Tawnos remembered later, after it was all said and done, was the stony stare with which Urza favored his younger brother as Mishra flattered Kayla, and Mishra's toothy white smile as he regarded his brother's wife. So, put a pin in that plot point for a moment. Anyways, Urza and Kayla ended up in a huge fight within a couple days because Mishra offered a complete cessation of hostilities as well as rescinding their claim on the sword marches, and all they wanted in return was Urza's Might Stone. Kayla wanted to take the deal because she got something from it, and Urza didn't want her to take the deal because it was his stone. I haven't brought up the stones much because other than causing the rift between the brothers in the first place, they haven't really been a central plot point recently, but each brother still carried his stone with him everywhere, and I believe were still intoxicated by the stones. Anyway, this was a hard fucking no from Urza, and this put more strain on the already strained marriage. However, this argument got put on hold because they did have the whole peace talks thing going on, so Urza and Tawnos went to show Mishra and Ashnod the ornery that Urza was so proud of. The tour went well as the brothers bonded over their love of machinery and learning. Mishra mentioned that he wished to build his own school when he had the time and roots, while Urza offered Mishra his writings on effective teaching methods. Despite his argument with Kayla, Urza was determined to keep his head and not screw up the chance at peace. Then there was a party that night, and people got pretty drunk. Ashnod and Tawnos hung out and talked for the first time, and after hitting it off, Ashnod told Tawnos to meet her at midnight so they could check out the dragon engine, and told him to bring wine. So later that night, Tawnos got some wine, and on his way to Ashnod, he stopped by the ornery to ask Urza if there was anything specific he should look for when examining the dragon engine. However, when he got there, Kayla was there closing the door on her way out. Apparently, Urza was resting as he had had a long day, and they had just finished making up. Tawnos left without seeing Urza and headed to see Ashnod, who was fixing up her staff as Tawnos got there. They drank wine and talked. Ashnod accidentally gave up some intel, but Tawnos didn't really notice until they talked about what Mishra wanted, and he suddenly had an oh shit moment and bailed on Ashnod to go wake up Urza. And lo and behold, Kayla had swiped the stone from Urza after she got him drunk. Urza and Tawnos sprinted out, heading towards Kayla, but Tawnos got held up when the guards alerted him to Mishra missing from his chambers. After authorizing a search for Mishra, Tawnos ran to catch up to Urza. By the time Tawnos got to the royal chambers, Urza had regained his stone, and Mishra and him were blasting their power stones at each other, much the same way they did when Tokeshia died. Also, Kayla was there, in a sheet, because her and Mishra banged. The entire universe is standing between these two dick-headed brothers ever having the chance to make up. Anyway, Kayla saw Tawnos and stepped forward, while Tawnos shouted at her to stay back, and Urza dropped his stone for fear of repeating the Tokeshia incident, and Mishra hit Urza with the power of his stone. Urza was fine, but Mishra used the opportunity to book ass out of there, and the Falaji disappeared into the night. Other than Ashnod, who was now a prisoner after she lost a fight to Tawnos and a pile of guards. Urza spent the next 4 months chasing after Mishra and ignoring his wife and stately matters. Hard to blame him, especially since Kayla was pregnant. If you're wondering who the father is, I'll say nobody knows for sure, but I'll give you 2 guesses. Tawnos and Ashnod talk more while Ashnod is imprisoned, and Ashnod teaches Tawnos that the bodies of living creatures are basically just machines. And she explains that she thinks the dragon engines were made by replacing parts of a dragon until they were fully created. Not making a device to look like a dragon, but instead making the device from a dragon. Pretty fucked up stuff. She also warns Tawnos that something big is coming, but she doesn't know any details, just that she is confident in how Mishra would react to the situation he's found himself in. So, Mishra set up a trap for Urza by marching troops around to be spotted in various areas, and left a dragon engine sitting in a fake camp that Urza and his men attacked. This ruse caused Sheraman, one of Urza's pilots, to break his leg. Oh, and the rest of the Ornithopter pilots in this attack died. Anyway, the next day, while Urza was still far away from Krug and walking back with Sheraman, who again had a broken leg, Mishra launched a surprise attack. He had his dragon engines and soldiers come from the harbor of Krug, which was the only part of the city not walled, and the 3 dragon engines in the assault absolutely wrecked the city, practically razed it to the ground. Tawnos managed to collect most of Urza's research materials and plans and had one of his students take the last Ornithopter and Urza's research and escape the city. It was only later that Tawnos realized he should have probably used the Ornithopter to rescue Urza's pregnant wife, and maybe himself. But c'est la vie. Instead, he bargained with Ashnod, requesting her assistance to save the queen. After finding out the queen's baby might be Mishra's, she agreed, and was given back her staff. While they were escaping, they ran into the Qadir himself. Ashnod told the Qadir that the Queen and Tawnos were under her protection, and the Qadir told Ashnod that she was a crutch for Mishra that he would end. So, Ashnod killed the Qadir, and Tawnos nor Kayla ever knew that that was the Qadir. Ashnod then got Tawnos and Kayla to the docks, put them on a boat, and told them to fuck off along the coast, as they'd be less likely to be caught that way. Then she kissed Tawnos and bailed. It took Urza a month to make it to the ruins of Krug, and his spirit was pretty much broken by the devastation. All his life's work was destroyed and his friends gone or dead. He was quickly told that one of his students escaped with his notes, and that was enough for him to pick himself up and get mega pissed. He decided he would kill his brother next time he saw him. About a year after that, the Brotherhood of Gix entered the story. These guys are part of a secret sect of monks that worship Phyrexia and machines. They made their way to the Cave of Kolios and activated the portal to Phyrexia, allowing Gix to come to Teresiare. Gix could feel the call of the weak and might stones, and had an insatiable desire for both parts of the stone. He rallied the Brotherhood of Gix, and had them infiltrate both Mishra and Urza's circles to gather intelligence. During this time, Mishra had managed to build himself a workshop within a great tree on the northwest tip of the Kur Ridges. Mishra was also now the Qadir, and so could press his will instead of pressing it through a proxy. He spent much of this time gathering troops and knowledge and constructing foundries and carving out mines for resources to feed his war machines. The Falaji were raiding Yoshin territory and accumulating significant resources. But Mishra, as always, was captivated by the lack of news on Urza. Mishra was getting paranoid, wondering what his brother could be planning. At least one of the dragon engines had failed by this time, but Mishra's colleagues were doing what they could to figure out how to either fix or build their own. Ashnod grew sick of plundering the broken ruins of Yoshin territory and insisted to Mishra that she be allowed to conduct her own research, promising to create weapons for Mishra. Mishra argued against this idea, but Ashnod tactfully hit him with the old, "Your brother lets Tawnos do research and they're probably going to kick your ass," which made Mishra really mad. But it did work, and Ashnod was allowed to conduct her research. She had many requests, but the thing that she required most of was people nobody would miss. Yikes. It took Tawnos and Kayla 3 whole years to finally catch up to Urza, who had now built his famous tower, or the first of his many towers. By this time, Tawnos had made a new toy. Robots that were covered in a clay that had healing properties, or at least if you stabbed the clay, it would stick itself back together. So, close enough. Anyway, Urza found these new automatons to be most impressive, as they handled his new Yoshin soldiers, which were just smaller robots with swords. Urza named Tawnos a master artificer and showed him the pile of power stones that Argiv had relinquished now that they were afraid of getting their faces torn off. Oh yeah, Urza's kid, named Harbin, was now 2.5 years old, and it's mostly confirmed at this point that it is Urza's child. Anyway, for like the 100th time, Urza and Kayla make up, and all is well for now. During this time, Gix is also up to Gix things. He's gaining intelligence on Mishra, and to a lesser degree with Urza. Gix can feel the call of the stones, and therefore knows both brothers' locations. But Mishra was the one who touched his mind, and while Mishra spent those years dreaming of Phyrexia and Gix, Gix was dreaming of Mishra. That being said, Gix is still just vibing and waiting for his moment, and as far as I know, he hasn't even left the Cave of Kolios. Ashnod was doing some pretty fucked up things with prisoners and other people no one would miss. She had created transmogrants, which were basically just human drones. They kinda looked like ice cream melting in the sun, as all of their features were melted away. They didn't feel pain, and attacked much like zombies would, but they didn't have teeth, so they didn't bite. Oh yeah, they smelled really bad. The book made sure that you know they smell bad. But Ashnod showed her first transmogrant to Mishra, and it killed 3 of his elite guards and only gave out after its organs failed, which was good enough to impress Mishra, and allowed Ashnod to continue working on the project. That being said, it took Ashnod a year to get a success rate higher than 50%, which isn't ideal. It also took her another year to get the creations trained and operating as a unit. Enough time had passed that Mishra was ready to assault the Corlysians, which he and the Philagi determined to be traitors. Ashnod's transmogrants were ready, but she demanded control of the entire army, claiming that she couldn't guarantee victory without complete cohesion. It's also a good point to mention that the Philagi were pretty misogynistic, and most of them did not respect her. They also had superstitions that red-haired women were of the devil and not to be trusted, and Ashnod had red hair. So this was a bit of a hiccup, but Mishra eventually agreed and put her in command. Her plan was a relatively simple one. The core of their force would be her transmogrants, with a few lines of human troops in front of them to mask their true nature. And the flanks would be covered by the cavalries. They would bait in the force and smash the flanks for that classic 1-2 punch. The plan did not end up working though, for 2 main reasons. First off, Tanos had built many more of the Claymen, and so the Corlysians used the same tactic, but instead of fleshy piles of goop, they used clay-covered robots. So Tanos' automatons just bodied the hell out of her troops. And despite this setback, she attempted to send the cavalry to their likely deaths. But because she was a woman, the troops didn't move. Mishra's forces got routed, and they lost the battle decidedly. Ashnod blamed the cavalry commander, who simply said he did not see the signal to push forward. So Mishra sent Ashnod to Sarinth to secure fealty of their leaders. Ashnod rightfully felt Mishra was doing this to keep her out of the way, which is mostly true. Mishra said he didn't want his command structure killing each other. He also explicitly asked her not to kill the cavalry commander, because it would be difficult to explain, and then told her to take a small force of men she trusted to secure the fealty of Sarinth. When Ashnod asked Mishra what he would do if they wouldn't swear fealty, he responded that he would send a larger force with a real commander. Ouch, that's cold. But now we're at a point in the story where people other than Urza and Mishra bootlickers are going to be relevant to the story. We find ourselves in Teresia City, 5 years after the fall of Yosha, and it's the first time Feldon comes into play, along with the Archimadre, leader of Tercia, who doesn't have a name that's ever mentioned. This is also the introduction of Drafna and Hercule of Latnam, as all these scholars meet with Loren, who I don't think I've mentioned. She was one of Tokesha's older students who was there when Mishra and Urza went to the dig site to learn. Anyway, she was invited to Tercia to discuss the Brothers' War, and brought with her much of Tokesha's old research to assist with the creation of the Union of the Third Path. Basically, it was a group of scholars who thought maybe tossing all power and weapons of war into the hands of 2 squabbling brothers that don't seem to give a fuck about anyone else or the environment might not be the most sustainable plan ever, and maybe we should figure something else out before they march their war machines up to our walls demanding our trees. Which doesn't really seem all that unreasonable if you ask me. But it does mean that we now have 4 distinct factions that are shaking this world up. Of course, we have Urza and Mishra, both ripping apart the eastern side of the continent. Then we have the Third Path, who seek to learn how to stop the brothers, or at least contain the damage. And we have Gix, the Phyrexian demon that's making slow and careful moves to gain the knowledge he needs to get both stones. Compelling stuff. While this is going on, Urza and Tanos were being honored in Penregan, the capital of Argive, as Tanos was given the title of Master Scholar, and Urza was crowned Lord High Artificer and Protector of the Realms, which is a fancy way of saying that he got control of the military. The job even came with a mitre and a scepter. A mitre is a popet, in case you've never seen the card Urza's Mitre and put 2 and 2 together. Thanos felt it was odd that Urza accepted the position, knowing that the responsibility would keep him further from his goals of just being left alone and building shit. But it wasn't until they were alone that Urza had Thanos examine the miter. And you see these gems stitched onto this ridiculous hat? Power Stones. That's right, just like the time Urza married a princess for a book, he also accepted the job of basically Commander-in-Chief for a few handfuls of Power Stones. Urza is incorrigible. And Ashnod has not been succeeding with her task of acquiring Sarenth. It's turned into an all-out siege, and as Mishra promised, he has given command to someone else. Gix also finally left the Cave of Koilos, as his Brotherhood summoned him directly into Mishra's workshop. The time has come for him to initiate his plan, as Mishra was moving his court to Tomakul to better organize the siege of Sarenth. Mishra had found himself on a war of several fronts, which is far from ideal. The Eastern Front was still shaky given that it's bordering Urza, but at this point, Mishra had pretty much completely stripped Yoshin territory of their resources, so it was a move he needed to make if he wanted to have any hope of securing the resources he needed. But Mishra's relocation proved to be inconvenient for Gix, who decided to make his move now before all the work his Brotherhood did of gaining intelligence went to waste. Gix finds Mishra asleep and alone, save her one, also sleeping guard. Gix attempts to slice Mishra's throat and steal his stone, but the stone protects Mishra by creating a ward that Gix is unable to pass through. Gix assumes that since the stone is broken and crying for its other half, it may think that Mishra is its other half, which is why it's protecting him and refusing to leave him. With this in mind, Gix teleports back to the Cave of Koilos and starts planning on a way of either corrupting Mishra and Urza, or getting the stone back together. But let's head back to Teresia City, shall we? The Archimadrate has welcomed any and all scholars willing to share their knowledge, and this has included the Brotherhood of Gix, which probably won't end well. Drafna finds them to be religious nutjobs, but the rest of the Council of the Union of the Third Path doesn't seem to argue with this sentiment, which is a little strange because these days Feldon and Drafna seem to argue about everything. But most of the time it boils down to the fact that Drafna is not willing to believe anything he doesn't see with his own eyes, and he thinks the concept of magic is stupid and not real. But the real meat of this part of the story is that some fishermen dredged up an interesting artifact that found its way into Feldon's hands. This artifact is called the Golgothi Silex. The Silex drains the sunshine and happiness from you when you touch it. It's also cold to the touch, even in the hot environment that is Teresia City. It has an inscription on it that says, "Wipe the land clear. Bring the end. Topple the empires to bring a fresh start." It also says on it, "Call the end. Fill with memories of the land." That's pretty heavy, but this whole conflict is getting more interesting on all fronts, as Urza has finally led an assault on Mishra. Urza set out with a grand army to take Tomakul. With Mishra's attention on the siege of Sarenth, Urza felt he finally had an opportunity to attack. Always a cautious man, Urza had towers built roughly every 30 miles and left mechanical garrisons for defense of his supply line. However, this proved not to be enough. The Falaji used their cavalry to hit and run, straining Urza's resources and slowing him down. The siege of Sarenth had finally ended with Mishra's victory, so the troops that were tied up in that siege soon came pouring in. Urza's army was crushed, and Tawnos was taken capture by the Falaji. He woke up in Anublia, and was fortunate that Ashnod likes him, but less fortunate that she's kind of a psycho. She was tasked with getting information from Tawnos by torturing him, and she did do that. It was during this time that Tawnos and Ashnod found out that the Brotherhood of Gix was in both courts. But otherwise, Ashnod was a bitch, and tortured the hell out of Tawnos. Tawnos was mad that she's crazy, and then she electrocuted him a bunch and left. When he woke up, he found in his possession her Power Stone earrings and some golden wire. These were important components for the staves that Ashnod had created that could cause people great pain or even death. The other component needed was a skull, and there was a human skull in his chamber as well. So Ashnod had given him everything he needed to make a weapon and escape. Which he did. However, the Brotherhood of Gix are some crafty motherfuckers because they snooped around and proved that Tawnos is kind of an idiot, because he disposed of the earring bits by dropping them down the grate of his cell, and the Gix monk found them. He showed them to Mishra and explained the situation. Mishra accused Ashnod and had more proof than she had bullshit excuses, and in a shocking turn of mercy, Mishra merely banished Ashnod from the Falaji land. Pretty fortunate, if you ask me, considering Mishra had the guards that let Tawnos escape killed. So, Ashnod took off with nothing but a horse she took from the stable and the clothes on her back, and she headed west, towards Teresia City. So, Tawnos makes it back safely, but a flying dragon engine did almost kill him. Also, they breathe something that's akin to napalm now. It's gooey fire that sticks to surfaces and burns for a long time. Anyway, Urza made little robot birds based off of a design Tawnos had made for Harbin years before. They swarmed the dragon engine and fucked it up. Harbin is now 14 and wants to become an ornithopter pilot, so Urza struggles with that decision. But other than new technology on both sides, there isn't anything else new going on in the war. Until the news reached Urza and Tawnos that Mishra is attacking Teresia City. And attack it he did. Teresia City is a surprisingly well-defended city for being a sanctuary of scholars. Big, thick marble walls and many ivory towers with ballista, catapults, and other tools of defense made the city quite unsiegeable for over a year. Unfortunately for Teresia City, it housed members of the Brotherhood of Gix, who opened the gate for the Falaji to take the city. Hercule died shortly after the gates were flung open. She used her strange meditation techniques and made 3 of the dragon engines literally disappear completely. Unfortunately, she was stabbed to death by a bunch of Falaja spearmen. Drafna, who was Hercule's husband, took this pretty hard. But the Union of the Third Path was separated and routed. Drafna charged out with soldiers, hoping to force his way through to Latnam. The Archimadrate was missing in action, and Felidon gave Lauren the Silex, and both escaped via secret tunnels. Well, sort of escaped. A month after making it out of the city, Lauren found herself dying in the foothills of the Kolgakin Mountains. Ashnod had been lying in wait with some soldiers, and they caused a rock slide that fucked up the traveling party Lauren was part of. Ashnod had no idea who Lauren was, but the Silex was with her, and Ashnod found that interesting enough to nurse Lauren back to health so she could torture information out of her. Anyway, Ashnod tortures the information out of Lauren, and Lauren escapes somehow. Not much worthy of note has happened because the book jumps ahead to when Harbin is 26, and he's crash-landed on Argoth. Argoth is an island to the southeast of Teretiair that is ruled over by Titania with the support of Gaia, so it is hella rich in resources. Harbin makes it off the island and goes to tell Daddy Urza about all the neat stuff they can chop down to make war machines. Urza sends Habin and Tawnos to Argoth to start fucking up the trees, which Titania takes exception to. So Urza managed to open up another front on his war. But it's totally cool because a member of the Brotherhood of Gix learns about the island and Urza's plans and runs off to tell Daddy Gix, who tells Mishra through the Brotherhood of Gix members that have completely infiltrated his court. So Mishra also heads to the island, but lands on the opposite side to open up a new front on his war, and the two brothers crush through Argoth, destroying it from both sides. Ashnod learns of this and heads to Argoth, and Mishra accepts her back. She brings him the Silex, but Mishra refuses to believe magic exists, even though Ashnod spent all this time learning how to do magic. Despite this, Mishra basically tells her that she's unbanished and she can do whatever she wants. Then he just sends her away to do whatever she wants, only vaguely threatening her if she should get in his way somehow. Also, Mishra had been getting fatter and older, but Ashnod noted here that he was looking young and healthy again, somehow. But he had still turned down the Silex as cheap bullshit that didn't do anything. The Brotherhood of Gix, however, find the Silex interesting and demand it from her, threatening to bend Mishra's ear against her if she doesn't comply. She acquiesced, but turns out that she isn't stupid, and had made a duplicate of the Silex, even imbuing it with magic, and gave the Brotherhood the fake Silex. Anywho, the brothers' armies continue to thrash through the lands of Argoth, and Urza shows up himself, knowing that this is the final battlefield. Titania herself is basically dead, as her power was tied to the lush forests that have since been pretty much completely burned to the ground. In a final act of desperation and rage, she unleashes Gaia's Avenger, a giant humanoid tree with a great stone sword, and attacks Urza's troops with it. It turns out to not be that big of a deal though, because Urza had a Sardian Colossus that he built or something. It's not super clear how he got it, but it's a big giant of stone and steel, and the two giant creatures swing on each other, and with a couple of blows they are dead, never to be heard from again. As the armies of Urza and Mishra reach each other, Gix arrives on the scene. His moment of triumph is soon at hand. Using his weird Phyrexian magic or whatever, he turns every automaton against everything, and all of the metal troops on both sides just start killing everything around them. The battle erupts into chaos, and Tawnos finds himself up shit creek without a paddle. Then Ashnod shows up to paddle him. Where was I going with this metaphor? Right. Anyway, Ashnod shows up and gives him the Silex, telling him that he needs to take it to Urza, who needs to fill it with memories from the land. Which is a fancy way of saying dump mana into it. Gix finds Ashnod and Tawnos and moves to kill them, but Ashnod has grown stronger in the ways of magic and steps up to fight Gix while yelling at Tawnos to get to Urza. So Ashnod and Gix fight and Tawnos leaves. However, before Tawnos can get to Urza, Mishra gets to him, and the two brothers have a disagreement that turns violent. What a surprising turn of events. Mishra gains the upper hand when Urza suddenly realizes that, hey, he can do magic, and he hits his brother with a lightning bolt straight to the fucking chest. Mishra flails back from the pain and his chest splits open, revealing that his human goop and bones have been replaced by metal goop and bones. So he's been fully indoctrinated by Gix, apparently. After taking a lightning bolt to the chest, he bails and runs back to one of his dragon engines, and like two ships passing in the night, Tawnos shows up with the Silex. He hands it to Urza and tells him what he knows, and Urza's like, holy shit, I understand everything ever, and he tells Tawnos to fucking leave, right this second, and find cover. After a moment of arguing, Tawnos dips, and Mishra had used that time to fuse with one of his dragon engines, the first dragon engine, the Mach Fauna. None of that really matters though, because Urza activates the Silex on the Hill of Golgoth, and it goes off like a nuke, obliterating everything with a blast wave so large it's felt in Penregan and seen by Felidon and Loron in the Kolkhagan Mountains. Urza disappears during the blast, and this is when his spark was activated, but that's more trivia than important information to this story. Because that's how the war ended. Everything is basically destroyed. Gix does his little teleport shit and made it back to the Cave of Kolios, which was still in the blast range, mind you, but he takes the portal back to Phyrexia and survives. Tawnos survived by hiding out in a coffin-like device he had made, which put the person inside in a sort of stasis. Tawnos had made the device to house Urza's brother because he felt Urza couldn't kill him and certainly couldn't let him go. Anyway, Urza comes back and opens the coffin to release Tawnos, and tells him, thanks for everything, tell my wife I'm sorry I destroyed the continent, and also I should leave. I have things to learn and I don't want people to die from it anymore. And he just fades away to go plane jumping or something. Also, his eye sockets now house the Might and Weak stones. So, that's neat. Oh yeah, and Gix invited the surviving Brotherhood of Gix into Phyrexia. So they bailed to Phyrexia to cause problems for someone at some time. And then it started to snow, because the continent was about to hit an ice age. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. The lore of Antiquities is super compelling, and by far the most compelling source I found when researching was The Brothers' War by Jeff Grubb. Everything else is kind of hit or miss, but that book itself is definitely worth checking out. I would highly recommend it. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Maybe leave a like, that makes me feel good. And I'm always happy to hear from different perspectives. So if you have something to say, leave a comment. Or leave a comment if you don't have anything to say. The algorithm loves that. And if you enjoyed watching and would like to see more from me, you can always subscribe, but you don't have to. Either way, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a magical day.